Now, I'm going to need a little help. In a few moments, we're going to do a little activity. So I want you to consider if you're willing to participate. It basically is you'll stand by the mic back there. We'll set up a little line of people, and I'll give you the rest of the assignment in just a moment. But think of you're willing to participate. This quote is from Finite and Infinite Games, A Vision of Life as Play and Possibility by Professor Emeritus of History and Literature of Religion at New York University. His name is James P. Carnes. He said, "If I tell a story as a way of bracing up an argument or amusing an audience, I'm not telling a story for its own sake. To tell a story for its own sake is to tell it for no other reason than to tell a story. These are the best kinds of stories. Our first response in hearing this kind of a story is a desire to tell it ourselves. The greater the story, the greater the desire. It is as if the story is itself seeking the occasion for its reoccurrence, making use of us as agents. We do not go out searching for stories for ourselves. It is rather the stories that have found us for themselves. So now, we are going to tell a story for no other reason than to tell a story. I'm going to say a line, and then someone at the microphone is going to say a line. And we're going to continue that, the microphone's in the back, until the story has come to an end. So I invite those of you who are willing to go back. Again, I'll give you a line or two as we move through this. And go ahead and line up back in the back. If you wouldn't mind, those of you who are willing to participate. Please keep your masks on as we do this. All right. Here we go. Once upon a time, there was a Unitarian Universalist who
decided to name all the things in her possession after religious ideas.
Okay. And so
she started, and she had so many religious ideas that it went on and on and on for days.
But one day,
she figured out she couldn't possibly name all of her items after every single religious idea around the world. And so she realized she had to think about it a little bit and choose what worked best for her beloved items in her home.
okay, next. Because of that, she
spent a long, solitary time thinking about things, and then finally decided this was not a decision to make alone.
And not only that, oops, okay.
It read my mind. Not only that, she decided the best way is to let all these objects decide it for themselves. And so she compressed everything in her house into this little box, compressed it and compressed it and compressed it and compressed it till it was only as big as this microphone.
Next. until finally,
with all her things the size of a microphone, Mecca had blended with Siddhartha, which had blended with Demeter, and Jesus and Muhammad and Saint Mary, and all these ideas decided that it was best for one not to overpower the other.
and ever since then,
Ever since then, once a year in her home, she welcomes the spirits of all of those beautiful, amazing people into her home, and she celebrates, opens her heart, welcomes them in a most beautiful, beautiful ceremony and celebration.
the end. Thank you all. We can clap, it's all right. Some people say that organizing Unitarian Universalists is like herding cats. And yet, you all were able to tell a story together. Tell a story just for the sake of telling a story. And you were able to do a silly putty meditation. Kars, this psychologist, this interesting person who wrote this book, he calls this playing with silly putty and pretending like you're a wave and telling a story like we did, he calls that an infinite game. It's like having a tea party with your bears and dolls, or playing hide and go seek, or pretending you're a kitten. These are all what he calls infinite games. He says there are two kinds of games, the infinite game and the finite game. Now, what is a finite game? Board games are finite games. Monopoly, Risk, football, basketball, golf, they're all finite games. Ooh, we have to play. Alex, would you join me? She's going to be my straight man here, or straight person. Think for a moment of some of the characteristics of a finite game. Alex, if you would, like Monopoly, football, poker, what are some of the characteristics of those kinds of games?
All of those games have a set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
Of the ones you mentioned, I don't think you can really play them by yourself. I feel like most of them you need another person, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Just very strategic, I think, is a good word for it.
Okay. So what are the characteristics of an infinite game?
Some of those you can play by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Not a very set of rules, and you can use more of your own imagination
Mm-hmm.
and creativity. My favorite kinds of games, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's thank Alex for getting up here. And I didn't tell her she was going to be doing this until just before we got started. So think about infinite and finite games, like she said. Finite games can be played within an infinite game. So, for instance, you could play poker at a pretend, tea party. Okay? And that's okay. But it is a little unwise to do an infinite game while you're playing a finite game. My son did this. He was playing soccer, but for him, he was playing the infinite game of finding shapes in the clouds, which didn't turn out as well, and he isn't really a soccer star now, so I guess that was okay. Carr says that the main difference between finite games and infinite games boils down to this. Finite games are played for the purpose of winning, and infinite games are played for the purpose of continuing to play. Now, finite games also can be seen as having a defined beginning, middle, and end. Okay? And infinite games can go on indefinitely. Sometimes you can go in and out of playing an infinite game over a long period of time, perhaps even a lifetime. For instance, you could pretend to be that astronaut we just all pretended to be a few minutes ago. You could do it later on today. You could do it next week. You could do it while you're driving home. I think many of the drivers in Miami are probably playing an infinite game of being astronauts or something in their cars rather than actually driving most of the time. One final thing about playing any game is that whoever plays, whatever the game, whether it's infinite or finite, plays freely. That's to say, that's the basic principle of play, that you choose to play. You can't be forced to play. Think about gym class. You took gym class in high school or college or something, and your coach said to you, or your teacher, you have to play basketball. Right? This is what you have to do during PE. You have to play. There is a qualitative difference between the basketball game that you play in gym class because you were told you have to play, and the pickup game that you may play with your friends on a Saturday afternoon. That is a big difference for Carnes. He says one is a requirement, the other is free choice. So that the pickup game is the only one that's really play. So what about these ideas of game and play? I want us to consider them about how we might use them as we think about our own spiritual journey. How do you decide what you believe and what beliefs you take out into the world? Now, we're all exposed to lots of different beliefs, values, ethics, morals, ideas. And we all choose one or two or several and incorporate them into who we are. Okay, but how do we do that? Well, in a sense, we make a game of it. We play with them. We sample a belief. We might play with it in our minds, perhaps imagining or visualizing what it might be like to hold that belief. We might play with that belief as we interact with others in the world. In other words, we develop our own personal beliefs, values, ethics, morals, ideas through an infinite game. Now, before I go on with this, I want to say that the last time I talked about this, and I talked about this with Unitarians before, some people got quite upset. they take their beliefs very seriously. And when I said, it's all about play, they were like, no, it is not. It is deadly serious. Well, I said to them, I understand that not everybody develops their beliefs in this way. Okay? I understand that. And some people were given beliefs by their parents or their teachers or their schools or their culture. But I also said, I like this idea of playing with beliefs and values and ethics and morals and ideas. Because it means I don't latch onto something blindly. That I take on something for a while, and to see, after I use it, after I live in it for a while, whether it fits for me. As some of you know, I consider myself a Buddhist, panentheist, humanist, Unitarian, Universalist. And I suspect that many of you would have difficulty describing your spirituality with one word. And I have to say, the labels that I use for my own spirituality, I use gently, playfully, rather than deadly seriously. I am not 100% Buddhist. Instead, I have played with some Buddhist ideas and practices until I found the ideas and practices that fit for me. In the infinite game of being a Buddhist, I practice Zazen meditation, mental non-attachment, and loving kindness for all beings, knowing that these beliefs, practices, and ideas work for me. But I am open to new ideas, beliefs, practices as my life evolves. I've even played with prayer. The prayer I use today includes starting with various names for divinity, whichever come to mind, then affirming the many blessings, good things that have happened in my life, then offering loving kindness and healing to those who are experiencing suffering, both people I know personally and then anyone in the world that is suffering. How I have prayed in my life has changed. I started as a Catholic doing the Our Father and the Hail Mary, and then I changed. And prayer didn't have any meaning for me at all. And so I didn't pray. And then I came into Unitarian Universalism, and I started reading prayers by some of our forebears. And I particularly liked the prayers written by Unitarian Theodore Parker, because in my mind, he was playfully describing the divine in many different ways using nature, including, O thou infinite one who dwellest not in temples made with hands, but art a perpetual presence, living and moving and having thy being in every star that flowers above and every flower that flames beneath. I really like that. And sometimes we decide we want to participate in this spiritual game or play with others as we consider what our beliefs, values, ethics, morals, and ideas are. And so if we do infinite play in a community like this one, for the purpose of spirituality, we call that religion. Many Unitarian Universalists intentionally embrace spirituality as an infinite game, individually and as a community. They try on various beliefs, values, ethics, morals, and ideas in this kind of community that affirms a responsible search for truth and meaning. You see, our heritage is one of change and playing with beliefs and ideas. If you look back at the history of Unitarian Universalism, you see we started as two different Christian religions. Unitarianism, with its core tenet being that Jesus was human and that there's not a Trinitarian God. And Universalism, with its core tenets being that there is no hell and everyone is destined for heaven. Over time, centuries, Unitarian Universalists became more humanistic, focusing on how we live our lives in the here and now. Today, our religion is more pluralistic, focusing more on values rather than beliefs to form its foundation. Often you will hear in this church and Unitarian churches all over the country that revelation is not sealed. Our beliefs are not static. That we are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual beings that are in process. We can be playful and we can be very serious about our beliefs. And whatever we do here, we are always respectful of each other's beliefs in community. At least we aspire to be. We do the best we can. Because we are all in process. We know that. And all of us have a hard time using one single label to describe what we believe. Kars says of religious play, the myths of Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad are exemplary, but not necessary. No myth is necessary. There is no story that must be told. Stories do not have truth that someone needs to reveal or someone needs to hear. It's not necessary for infinite players to be Christians. Indeed, it's not possible for them to be Christians seriously. Neither is it possible for them to be Buddhists or Muslims or atheists seriously. All titles can only be playful abstractions. Infinite players are not serious actors in any story, but the joyful poets of a story that continues to originate and cannot be finished. Religion is but one infinite game. One of the experiences that I had that solidified that I am a Unitarian Universalist was when I first joined the Unitarian Universalist Church way back. I think it's back when 1979. And I was attending a discussion group, not unlike our Decentering Whiteness book club or our Indigenous Peoples History of the United States. I sat in this room at First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas, with about 15 other people. A television set was in the corner, and they had a VHS player. The leader of the group pushed the tape into the player, and it began. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Yes, we were watching the first Star Wars movie, and we had a very serious and a very playful discussion of the theological implications of that film. Sometimes the discussion got quite heated, like when somebody said out loud that they didn't think C-3PO was necessary to the film. And there was a time or two in this Star Wars discussion, I wondered if people might come to blows, especially when somebody said, "There's no such thing as the Force." But always, there was someone in the group who stopped whatever aggression or dispute that was going on and reminded us of our covenant that we had established before we even started the film. Our covenant was, it is better to be compassionate than to be right. At the end of the discussion about the spiritual messages in Star Wars, we all got up and thanked one another for joining in this discussion, shook hands or hugged, left with positive feelings in our hearts. This infinite game we call religion can be very serious, very playful, and we can express all that is within us, our thoughts and feelings, our spirituality, our ethics, our rituals and beliefs with one another. So as a rule for infinite play, I try to remember that covenant I learned all those years ago. It is better to be compassionate or loving, caring, nice than to be right. I believe that's important for us as we respect one another's beliefs while being playful with one another. I know that this is not always easy to do. Our intention may be to be playful with one another, but the impact sometimes might hurt someone's feelings. I'm sure that you've experienced that when you've said something to someone. You didn't intend for it to hurt their feelings, but they did feel hurt. So during this infinite game, when something is said or done with playful intent, but which comes across as being hurtful or marginalizing or minimizing, let's be ready to stop the game. Express what hurt, then forgive one another and begin the game again in love. As Unitarian Universalists, we're doing something incredible here, something that is sometimes extremely difficult and yet wonderfully rewarding and enriching in our lives. We are participating in this infinite game of religion together. And as we continue to play, we are also honoring each other's worth and dignity, respecting each other's beliefs, encouraging each other to grow spiritually and ethically, and affirming each other's responsible search for truth and meaning. I want to end today with some words by Debbie Ford. Your soul is infinitely creative. It is alive and expansive in nature. It is curious, playful, changing with the tides of time. So as we leave here today, as we participate in this infinite game of spirituality and religion, I invite you, be curious, be creative, be playful. Open yourself to the possibility that in this infinite game of religion and spirituality, you might change. And be prepared to grow in ways that you might not.